Yeah, it's alright, isn't it?
Kia ora, good morning. It's time for a coffee while I have a think about the video I just watched. A year ago, Scratch Bashing put out a one-item challenge where he made a crashed sci-fi vehicle from a water pistol. Then, in a more recent video, the one we just seen, he mentioned that sadly only one person had taken him up on the challenge. So, challenge accepted for a second time. As long as I can figure out what one item to make into something cool. Hold on, I have an idea. We need something else. Especially because these screws are the worst. Okay, so after a bit of time and only a little swearing, let's meet the bits. But wait, there's more. First off, we have the empty jug. This has a lot of good curves and some interesting shapes in it, so I'm going to have to cut it up more with a hacksaw. Element coil could be the pipey bits of some fearsome engine or the integral gubbins of a warp chucker. Stupid screws to add to my collection. One springling. The kettle cradle and its bum box. Lots of interesting detail and shape here. The outside curve of the handle. Again, lots of good detail and very pleasing shape. Curvy, huh? Sexy scrap. A bunch of other little random bits like the switch and some broken pieces from when I had to persuade various parts with force. Whatever I'm going to make, it's going to be crashed or broken, so that's no problem. Here is the filter with a really fine mesh. It makes me think of the captain's cabin, the back window on a galleon or a man of war. Some squishy latex bits that really don't take paint or glue that well, but as you will see later. Then we have the black electronic plasticky bits, that's a technical term. Various wires and metal components in these will need further extraction. The plasticky bits themselves might make good engines or generator parts. And lastly, the lid separates into 3 bits. This middle bit would definitely make a good bulkhead somewhere in the underhive. Here's that hacksawing I mentioned. Didn't make a mess at all. Free flog. I also decided to remove all of the little twiddly bits under the cradle so that it looked like this. These bits will be good for adding some detail hopefully, because so far most of the stuff I have is pretty big. And because I'm a sucker for punishment, I also removed this bit from the inside of the lid. So that's the bits. Now on with the concept. Blue tack time. I'm still not sure what I'm going to build at this point. Best just shove some stuff together and see what looks like something other than a broken kettle. It could be a swamp fan boat like in Grizzly Adams or Gentle Ben, whichever TV show that was. Or I could put the underhive bulkhead here. Nope. Ooh. Okay. Now, suddenly that looks a lot better. Alright. Movie magic. I've done it. Yep. I've made a gun. I wonder if we can add water to this. No. Okay. Let's stay on track. Oh no. I've made a pile of junk again. Now let's get serious here for a second. I totally beat this challenge. Because cardboard is as ubiquitous as glue in this hobby, and because the title of this video would not have been as clickbait especial. This bit here was wrong, so a brief conversation with the hacksaw turned it around. Here we are now about 30 minutes later after a heavy application of me old trusty hot sticker. This thing's definitely shaping up to be some kind of heavy metal tugboat or grav tug. I reckon this bit goes here, and then suddenly I'm back to broken kettle. How are you supposed to make a cup of joe in this Picasso appliance? At this point, I'm pretty happy with the build. I don't need to model both sides as I want this to be a crashed vehicle. That will mean one whole side can be partially buried in the base. Next, I made this wee command console out of various components that were inside the black electrical plastic pieces. the small white plastic bits I cut out from the bottom of the cradle, and some other bits, including this really pleasingly angled white plastic piece. Here is what it looks like if I put it in place. And now, some more time and cardboard later, after I've let out some of my pent-up frustrations at the world with a knife and a kettle-com broke tug, things are looking pretty beat up and worn out. I imagine it's been out in the elements of some wasteland for a long time, probably scavenged of any good resources long ago. I'm sure a hobo even pissed in it. As I mentioned, I did use more cardboard around the front to fill in some holes, but remember, I still beat the challenge because while cardboard is like glue used so often in projects, it is without cost, if you know where to look. So, it's invisible. Ah, okay, that's it. Cardboard is invisible, and I only used a kettle. One item. Tick. Never mind the politics. Whatever hit this poor tug left some pretty permanent scars. Alright, now it's time to get yellow! For no reason at all, really. In hindsight, this was a pointless step, but I thought it might be fun to make my fingers and everything else a nicotine stain yellow. In the end, as the sand dried up, it drank up all the pigment and reverted back pretty much to the colour it had been before I added the ink. Oh well. To form the base, I dumped this mix of PVA, pointless yellow, and beach sand into some newspaper and dropped the stricken tug on its unmodelled side. Then I poured more sand onto it and left it to dry.
One eternity later.
After a quick spray base in black, we are ready to roll with the paint. The sand gets a mix of white paint and PVA thinned out with a little water. This will help bind the sand in place. You could also use Mod Podge. Moving on to the main hull, I'm thinking rusted metal, heavy exposure, lots of reds, yellows, earthy tones, a little bit of silver, slap it all on, slip, slap, slop, ubiquitous rusty pile of broken silvery yellowy red thing. Yeah, these cheap craft paints I'm using have really bad coverage, and the depth of pigmentation, well, it's not deep at all, so I'm going to have to put on several coats. I mixed up 2 different shades of red and 1 of yellow so I can add layers of colour with plenty of modulation. Wet on wet, just like Bob showed us, is a great way for getting some really convincing effects with cheap paints. And I also add in some sand to the mix to create some really rusty texture around edges, and in places I think weathering would have occurred. I keep layering the different shades of paint I've got again and again over the top of each other when they're still wet. As I said, this gives a really good mix of the colours. Once the first bunch of layers are dry, I go back in with a dry brush to pick out detail and edges. I add more colour modulation by dryish brushing with the original unmixed paints I used for the base coats. Next, I mix up some vermilion watercolour paint to add some really vibrant orange to the model. As with most things I do, using a watercolour on a model is an experiment. Then I go back in with the original colours over the top of the vermilion to add even more colour modulation. Now it's time to hide most of the subtle detail of what I've just put on with several coats of a homemade black wash. The first wash, this one that you're seeing, was too thin, so I redid it again with a stronger concentration of black ink. As you can see, the end effect is pretty cool. Certainly looks like old metal to me. I still need to put some more effort into the base, but yeah, this piece, it's really pleasing my eyes to look at.
Until eyes, me peepers clamp their gazing on this bit of red. Arr, the curse of the latex.
That one small spot of peeled paint might not have looked like a really big problem, yet pretty much 90% of the paint had lifted free from the latex, so that once I started running my finger around it, it just fell off really, really easily. So the fix I came up with was super glue and Mod Podge, and then I repainted. To sort the base out, I first added a dark brown wash made of black ink and vermilion watercolour. I soaked this into the colour-hungry sand, as the dark shade underneath what I'd already dry brushed over the top wasn't quite right. I used the same brown wash to add some more muck to just the lower parts of the ship, Perhaps the wasteland in which it dwells suffers from occasional flash floods, and this is the dirty high water mark. And then it's back in with more vermilion because I didn't think things were looking rusty enough, and the black ink had extinguished a lot of what I had painted prior. And now everything is back to looking good on the main hull. The finishing touch is to dry brush the base with white and then tan, and then, when that's all dry, running some raw yellow ink over the whole lot. Okay, I'm calling this project done. But before we get to the show-off shots, here's the bits I didn't use. The element, the bulkhead, and some other twiddly bits. These will definitely be getting used in future projects. Although these weren't the only bits I had left over, so I made these three out of some curvy plastic from the kettle handle. And that leaves me just enough time to say thank you for watching, and see you next time when I again turn my hand to repurposing landfill-destined junk into tabletop spunk.